Hello, everybody. Welcome to SandDAO Podcast number 23. 23 episodes into this thing. And today we have a bit of a different episode going on this time around. It's going to be with Davivi, also known as David. The three is silent. And Davivi is from the CityDAO. It's another DAO, and I'm starting kind of a mini series called Lessons from DAOs, other DAOs. We're going to bring in ApeCoin DAOs, but today is Davivi, and I heard Davivi speak a few Saturdays ago on Bulls on the Block, and Davivi came on and spoke a bit about how whoever moves first and gets the rules right for DAOs will become one of the mainstays. Whoever gets it right will become more of the permanent party within the DAOs. And those who get it wrong will fall by the wayside, sort of become a history lesson, that sort of thing. And this was during BOTB and during the ApeCoin DAO hour. And what really struck me was Davivi's the way he approached it. It was very much a collaborative, hey, let's try and figure this out, and also take lessons learned from what I've seen. And you'll hear he has a very, very experienced background, both academically, philosophically, and experientially. So, um, Davivi, great to have you. Thank you, and welcome on the show.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
So, Davivi, first time he is on the show, and also that might be the first time he's ever even heard of us. So, uh, for SandDAO Podcast, we are a podcast about the Sandbox DAO, educational news updates, and all the developments therein. The scope of the talk for today is a meet and greet between Davivi and myself and the stream, and also it's a learning opportunity for us to learn about his experience and all the things that we can apply to the Sandbox DAO as we live, learn, and grow, being so new. Disclaimer: we do not represent Sandbox Game or the Sandbox Foundation, which is the DAO. We are not your financial or legal advisors, and nothing we say is to be taken as financial or legal advice. That's true for me for both the Sandbox Game and the Sandbox Foundation. Davivi, do you represent CityDAO or any other entities other than yourself?
I do not. And I got to start by telling you some bad news. CityDAO's over.
Really?
Yep. About 3 months ago, we collectively decided to return all of the funds in the Treasury to our citizens. So we liquidated all funds. We had taken a snapshot before we announced this so that nobody could surreptitiously go buy a bunch of our NFTs and then exchange them. And then we airdropped the Treasury to everybody.
Huh. In my research, I did not stumble across that one. So shame on me for missing that rather large nugget, but let's look into that. All right, I definitely put that on the list then. All right, cool. Good to know. So that's our disclaimer then, and the VVs as well. And scoreboard. So there's one SIP, one sandbox improvement proposal up for voting right now. The crafting NFT drops by Crypto Diplo. We just interviewed him a few days ago, so check that out if you want to learn more about his SIP and where you stand yourself on the details. And then there's two SIPs that are going up for vote next week. One of them is mine for the Windows resizing and resolution options for the endgame portion of Sandbox. The other one is Metaverse and Disability by Meta Futura, and I'm trying to schedule up an interview with them next week. Sandbox style checkbook. So of the 15.5 million sand that we have budgeted, we have spent 2.3 million, so 15% of the budget has been spoken for of the 12 SIPs that have been voted on thus far. And Sandbox DAO-based.ai, we're still clocking in at 211,000 token holders, 1,800 wallet voters. And as of yesterday, delegations are now online. So there is a application forum post in the Sandbox DAO. So if you would like to be a delegate being pretty much a center point of many different wallets that have trusted them, the delegate to vote. And when the delegate votes, it automatically has all the other delegees voted for in the same for the same vote. And that's about all I know about delegations. So if you are interested in that sort of thing, there's a post that you should read on the forums. And that will bring us to the introductions. So my name's Lanzer. I'm the SandDAO podcast host and also president of MetaWorlds. MetaWorlds, we've published some experiences on Sandbox, as well as we write proposals for the Sandbox DAO. We've written 5 so far, and I'm in this because I love it. It's the perfect intersection of business, community, and gaming, and I'm all about all those things. And the DAO is the perfect intersection where that occurs. Davivi, if you wouldn't mind, where you come from, and a few details about your story.
Sure. Hey, everybody. My name is David, or you can call me Davivi. Where to start? Well, I'm from New York, the suburbs, not to get anybody confused. And I studied Chinese when I was in undergrad, mostly the culture, Taoism. I like the philosophy Taoism and the language. I went abroad for a little while. I came back. I went to law school. I'm a lawyer. I'm licensed in New York. I specialize in contract law and in Asian Pacific, focused on China law. Practiced a little bit in New York, worked for legal aid for a while outside New York, and then in New York did some corporate stuff. Then I moved to China, where I lived for 15 years. And in China, for the entirety of that time, I was a professor of law. First 8 years at a British university, second 7 years at a Chinese university, teaching business law. I also taught organizational behavior. And then in the last 5 or 6 years, I taught management and HR. And during the evenings, my passion, in addition to teaching, was I ran improvisational theater groups in Chinese. So I started the first Chinese improv group in China. I ended up being I did this for a decade. I was the creative director of the largest English language group in the whole country and the largest Chinese language group in the whole country. Won a big reality TV show, worked with tons of movies, TV. At first on camera, and then after that, working at TV stations in their creative writing departments as the only foreigner. I taught required classes in Chinese at the Shanghai Theater Academy, which was the number 2 school in the country, kind of the star maker school. And so now the reason I bring that up and the reason that's kind of relevant to my story is my focus in all of that was, how do you take a group of people who don't know each other and create a community of trust fast? Like, how does trust get built? Through honesty and integrity, and there are exercises you can do, and so that ties back into the DAO space, because as I was studying that, I ended up getting stuck in America, which is where I am now. In January 2020, I came home for 2 weeks to visit my family. COVID hit, I couldn't get back to China, so I accepted a fellowship to get a master's in Chinese focused on improvisational theater. And while I was studying that, I was already into the blockchain space in around 2017. I got in because I was very interested in the disruptive power of Bitcoin for remittances as someone who lived abroad. And then that got me into Ravencoin, particularly in the idea of fractionalizing real life assets, because I knew so many artists in China doing theater. I also do a lot of music and poetry and stuff like that. And I knew all these Chinese artists who were very poor, but extremely knowledgeable about things like jade or calligraphy, things that are very high worth. And so they would sometimes point things out to me and say, hey, you see that in this flea market or store? That's worth a lot of money, but they didn't have the money to buy anything. And I learned about Ravencoin and was like, this is the future of asset ownership, is to fractionalize it. So anyway, I was already into that space, the blockchain space. And while I was studying Taoism and theater here in America, getting a master's, I became very interested in the metaverse. And by metaverse, we can get into it, like, what do we mean by metaverse? But just this idea of a shared common space that is sort of created by humans, and we put bodies in that space. And how could that space be used to create areas of trust, social infrastructure, interconnectedness, agency, all of the things that I feel people more and more lack? So I met a professor who was very interested in that also, and then he offered to be my advisor if I went for a PhD. So I did. I got a second master's just recently in sort of metaverse sociology, and now I'm third year PhD in that. So 3 more years and I'll have my PhD in that, and then we'll see what happens, see what country I end up in.
Wow. So you're a PhD candidate for studying in metaverse sociology?
Correct.
Okay, so you're from New York suburbs. You practice law and you are a licensed lawyer, and specifically you said contract law, did I hear?
Yes.
That's funny. I'm a contract negotiator, and
Interesting.
and I've been negotiating contracts and writing contracts for the past 13 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, not licensed lawyer, but on the business end of all that, like contract clauses that the lawyers make sure are worded correctly. Right on. So you studied Chinese, and then you lived in China for 15 years, where
Oh,
you participated or you led improv theater.
yes.
You led a troupe of improv theater.
Yeah, so I had, I guess, three groups going on. There was an English language group that I had gotten involved in, and they did kind of what's called short form. People might be familiar with like Whose Line Is It Anyway? That
Oh
type
yeah,
of show.
yeah. Okay.
I don't love that stuff, but it's gamey a little. I like what's called long form, which is you get one word from the audience, and there are various ways to start it, but typically one word from the audience, and then you create about an hour long performance, a play.
Yeah.
It
Okay.
might have 3
Okay.
acts, multiple characters, it has themes and conflict and a climax, and it's meant to be like sort of one theater, like an hour long play. It's just all impromptu. And one of the things I loved in China, one of the reasons I love doing it in Chinese more than English, is comedy in China is very different than comedy in America. I mean, laughter is universal, but in China, there's no history of something like Monty Python or Saturday Night Live or any of that stuff. And so when I taught improvisation to Chinese people, they had no notion that it was meant to be funny. There was no idea that I never said you're trying to make jokes. I just said we're making it up on the spot. And so, for people who don't know, if you watch Chinese television compared to American television, for example, American television often is very fantastical. So look at something like a soap opera. You'll have these character connections that are absolutely bizarre. Somebody's twin died but was in a coma and came back, and then somebody else had, triplets, and just, one of them was adopted at birth and then came back, and they found each other and fell in love and got divorced, and just these really atypical stories. Or we have shows that take place in space, or where people have superpowers or things like that. China didn't have any of that. The average soap opera was about like a young person who was starting out work and their tensions with their stepmother. They're just very quotidian, very realistic, day-to-day kind of experiences. And so when I started teaching improv, I would say, okay, you 2 people, here, I'll give you a situation. You're 2 best friends, you're waiting online to see a movie. Go. And they would just have a conversation about there would be nothing weird about it at all. And I was like, I love this. This is fantastic. This is way more interesting. So my goal with that always, and this is where my story gets a little esoteric, because I always studied Taoism and loved Taoist philosophy. And that's kind of what got me to study Chinese in the first place, was in improvisation, I would always tell the actors, if there's 2 people in a scene, there's really 3. It's you, your partner, and the Tao. And the Tao is this energy, it's this force, and it wants one thing. It just wants us to play with it. The spirit of life, the energy of life, it is playful. Life is playful, and it wants us to play with it. And if we do, it will give us in return beauty. That's what it provides. Beauty takes on many shapes and forms. And so when we create something beautiful, we know it because it's beautiful. And the other thing I would tell them is when people buy a ticket to watch our show, what they're paying for is the opportunity to watch a group of people trust each other. That's it. Trust is beautiful. Hard to develop. It's fragile. and yet it can transcend lifetimes. It is incredibly important. It is something that stays with people forever, the bonds that we form with other humans. And I believe they don't, most people who have that level of trust, it's because they knew somebody for decades. And you see people at their best and their worst moments. And you get to be with them and empathize and be compassionate and share a lifetime with people to really grow to trust them. Well, I believe in improv, we can kind of truncate that experience and develop trust fast. And trust is beautiful. You don't need to know somebody for 10 years to trust them. You just need to learn to trust them. And so I developed a lot of exercises. I also used some traditional exercises. As a sort of academic, I used a lot of social psychology and things like that to make sure I could, sorry, I have to plug in my computer, to make sure I could develop trust. And what I would tell the actors is, it just doesn't matter if people think this is funny or even if they think it's interesting. What matters is, do we trust each other? That's the only thing that's ever mattered. And it continues to be the only thing that matters. And that really informs my work in the blockchain space. Because I truly believe, and I wouldn't say it's the only thing that matters. Ask a person who's homeless if trust is the only thing that matters. But in terms of something like Maslow's hierarchy, if you're familiar with it, it's these levels of things all humans need despite whatever culture they're from. Obviously, we need physiological things. We need water and air and food and shelter. We need these things to survive. And beyond that, we need safety. If you're living in a war-torn country and you're walking dangerous streets in the inner city, wherever you are, if you're in a dangerous situation, if you have enough money to live to pay this month's rent, but not next month's rent, we need stability and safety. Beyond that, we need social life, which doesn't even necessarily mean friends. Maslow called it belongingness. We need to belong to something. You look at a DAO like CityDAO. People would buy an NFT, and through the act of purchasing the NFT, you're a citizen. I actually own a space in Sandbox. I bought it a long, long time ago. If we're talking about the Sandbox Metaverse, which I believe we're talking about.
We are. So you own SandFam as well then, all right?
I own an extra large piece of land. I bought it. I waited. I bought a piece of Decentraland, Sandbox, Crypto Voxels, which I believe now is just called Voxels, because I believe in community. I believe in the difference between a space and a place. A space is just an area. It could be an area that we humans have created with ones and zeros, and it's digital space. It could be physical space. It could be, I think, environmental space. But something that's a place has some meaning to it. And with theater, I always would talk to the actors and say, we start out on this stage. This stage is just an empty piece of, it's just a space. It has no place to it yet. What we want to develop is trust, integrity, honor, love, compassion, these core principles. And then what we create together is a place. It might be a place of drama, it might be a place of tragedy, but it's a place where things happen and emotions affect. I'm really interested in the idea of affect and what that means, because affect to some people means emotion, and to other people it means an effective experience is something that is, I'm forgetting the word right now. It's like foam. It is something where to use a philosophy word, it's rhizomatic. You familiar with that? Do you know what I mean? Like a tree is central. It has roots on the bottom. Typically it grows upwards and then there are branches. A rhizome is a kind of plant like a weed or ivy, where when you look at ivy that's covering a house, there's no starting point. There's no bottom and top. There's just lots of different little nodes all connected together in strange patterns, maybe fractal patterns. And that's how I see connections, right? I don't think a DAO can be built like a tree, where you get some money, you start with the roots, you build the foundation, and then from that you get the branches. I think that's how centralized governments are built. But I don't really think that's how communities function. And so a lot of my feelings about what blockchains could be, what the metaverse could be, what DAOs could be, are if we can take a space like CityDAO, I believe, became a place where people would go to speak to each other about their troubles, especially their troubles affording to buy a house, because that's what CityDAO is focused on. How do we fractionalize real estate? Now, as a lawyer, I was working with other lawyers. There was one guy on our team who was absolutely brilliant, and because I'm not, I am a law teacher and I love it, but I am not a brilliant attorney, and this guy was. And he had figured out a way that we could use leases and licenses, because we can't fractionalize real estate. It's against the law. It'd be a security to give everybody 1 acre or half an acre. But what we could do is CityDAO owns 10 acres and we give everybody a license or lease to make certain use of an acre or half an acre. That's fine, because you don't own it. We can even separate the bundle of rights that is property. So anyway, we got into that in CityDAO. We did a lot of fascinating stuff. We went to ETH Denver, did a fantastic shared experience with Pizza DAO. I love Pizza DAO. And you familiar? Pizza DAO is amazing.
I just heard them yesterday, I think it was.
Oh, you should get snacks. Why not on this podcast?
Hall. Yeah, on Mondays.
Yeah, get snacks. Pizza DAO is unbelievable because they do what they say, which is pizza. Everybody gets pizza. They've spent like $1 million on pizza. And this is important, only supporting local. No Domino's or Papa John's, local pizzerias.
Yeah,
and the reasoning is
the other day about it.
Yeah, the reasoning is just like I'm talking about. Pizzerias are third spaces. They're not work and they're not home. And as a society, especially in America, we're losing our third spaces. Our bowling alleys, our barber shops, our local bars, our local mom and pop bookstores, our coffee shops, the places that are not corporate culture, but are actually local centers of political activism and discussion and generative connections. We're losing that, and I think the metaverse has the opportunity to help rebuild some of that. I'm a very strong believer in IRL connections, but we live in reality. The metaverse is unbelievable. It's global, and while we have to be careful, I believe, not to recreate some of the discrimination of the oppressive systems in the past. If you get in the metaverse, you can be an avatar, which means no one knows if you're black or white or tall or short or gay or straight, old, young, American, Iranian. And nobody knows anything about you. You can just be a dragon or a robot or a Hello Kitty doll or whatever. But how we treat each other still matters. We make judgments, we have biases, a lot of it's subconscious or unconscious, a lot of it's conscious, and we need to be careful not to recreate systems of oppression in new spaces. The way, some of the centralized spaces like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of those have sometimes recreated these systems of oppression. And so I think that's a very important part of the metaverse too, in terms of that second level of Maslow. You don't get to the third level if you don't have safety. You don't get to belongingness. Not really. We need to feel safe around each other. And then we can learn to belong. And then after that, we can get some self-esteem, which is, I think, really, I'm not talking about the final level, actualization. I'm just talking about self-esteem. Because, there's two kinds of esteem. There's internal and external. It's pretty easy to buy self-esteem. Get a trophy wife or husband, get some Rolexes, get, a Lambo. People will look up to you. But the internal self-esteem, that's the hard one. And I think the DAOs have an opportunity to really help build that. I think that's what we need to focus on. Sorry,
so you've been SandFam for how long? When did you first own your first land?
God, 3 years ago?
Okay. SandFam since 2021. All right. And before we get off too much from your background, there is something that I dug up that I wanted to test your memory on. And
Sure.
so Are you seeing able to see my screen? Slide 10. If you're looking at the slides,
Let's
you see
see.
that.
Slide 10. Um, yes.
So I found a picture, and it's blurred out. So there's progressive levels of blurring that I'm going to remove. I want you to tell
Okay.
me what this picture's from, and we'll see if let's see how fast you get it. All right. So
Okay.
here it is. Totally blurred out. Here's one
Mm-hmm.
layer removed. Not yet.
No, no.
Here's the next one.
Oh, God, no. Okay, I need one more level. Wait, I mean, I think that's an improv show, but I'm
Bunch of
not
people,
sure.
and there. I think it's the last. Oh no, that was the last one.
That, I mean, it looks to me like it's a performance my group went to a festival in the Philippines, I think. The
I'll give you a
Manila
hint.
Improv
You already
Festival.
said it in the course of our discussion. I didn't expect you to say it.
Oh. Well, I don't know if it's not. Maybe East Denver?
This is East Denver,
Okay.
2022. I blurred it out so that the faces weren't quite so. I didn't want to,
I
from
remember. Yes,
the
see,
old
I
times.
I was a panel discussant there. I didn't know those people that well then, but yeah, no, I remember that. It
Yeah.
was fun.
Anyways, I thought it was kind of fascinating as I was digging into some research, and I saw this video, this picture from Twitter 2 years ago, 2 3 years
Yeah.
ago, and yeah, I just thought it would be a fun
Yeah,
opportunity.
that was
Anyways,
great. We did a Harbinger Tax Experiment
okay,
with
what's
a
that?
guy named MemeBrains. So Harbinger Taxes, I'll give you the real short, dirty rundown. It was a guy named Arnold Harbinger, and he was an economist. And what he was frustrated with is if you look around a big city, you see lots of empty lots where we need housing. We need a public park, a library, a community garden, something. But it's just an empty lot. Why? Because whoever owns it, whatever company or rich people own it, I use the word rich people broadly, but whoever owns it, they're holding out for 10x their profits, right? They're not going to sell it for 2x or 3x. So it just sits there vacant. Vacant lots all over our cities. They're an eyesore. They actually do lead to increased crime and broken window syndrome and things like that. But much more importantly, they're just underutilized. And so, because the people live there. And so Harbinger had this idea. What if, we're not trying to uproot capitalism, but what if some things are always for sale? Always. Now that changes the whole nature of ownership. Imagine that you buy a piece of land, and that land is always for sale. Now, you declare the value. You, Lanzer, buy a piece of land. It's an empty lot. You declare the value, and you're going to pay taxes on that. So if the land is actually worth $1 million, if you declare the value to be $500,000, well, then you're going to pay a lot less taxes. But it's always for sale. I'm going to bid more than that. You declared it 500, I'll buy it for 550, and you can't stop me. So if you want to keep it, why don't you declare the value 3 million? Well, now nobody's going to buy it because that's not a good deal for anybody else. You think it's going to go up in value a lot over the years. So you're willing to pay, but you're going to have to pay the taxes on that 3 million. And it's going to be a lot, like 50% tax. Where does the money go? To a DAO. Now, when Harbinger created this idea, DAOs didn't exist, of course. So he had this idea that you would have a local community of people who would get this tax money, not the centralized government, and they would use it for their neighborhood to build whatever it is they want in their neighborhood. So if you want to keep your vacant lot holding out for a 10x, fine, go ahead. But you're going to pay that money to the community so that they can use it to improve their community.
And this
So
is
the
something that
idea would
CityDAO
be,
did at East Denver.
yes, so we did it as a blockchain-based proof of concept with this guy named MemeBrains, who is a big part of CityDAO. Now MemeBrains is in ApeCoin DAO doing something.
I know
And I highly
MemeBrains.
recommend working with him and talking
Okay.
to him. So MemeBrains is a close friend, and we had worked together. He rented a digital billboard truck. So it drives around, it has a digital billboard on the side. And what we said is, rather than having people rent that, it's always available on an app on your phone based in the blockchain. So a Web3 app, you connect your Ethereum wallet. We decided to use Polygon, I believe, to keep the gas transaction fees very low. And what ended up happening is exactly what we hoped. You had one DAO, I forget which DAO, had bid, let's say, $5 to put up their ad. Somebody else thought, well, hey, this is great advertising at ETH Denver. It's worth more than $5. So they bid $10. They put up their ad. Somebody else bid $11. They put up their ad. So it becomes a constant auction. But here's the thing. If I bid $11 and you want the space, you bid 15, okay, you get it. Now you get to declare the new value. So you can declare it at $1 again. It doesn't have to keep going up. It's what you think it's worth.
Oh, okay.
Once you have access to the asset, which in this case is a billboard, and Harberger's idea was land, you now decide, and you had to pay taxes on it. The taxes came out of your wallet. They were per minute. You could see it on the Web3 counter. MemeBrains and his partner Boss Dragon, who's a genius coder, are famous now for they've made the treasury dashboard for ApeCoin and for a bunch of other DAOs. So they're very good at making treasury dashboards with real-time data coming from, forget if it's a DeepDAO or Snapshot or all these different places that gets scraped and uploaded. So we had this board, this digital billboard that was constantly for auction for 3 days. It was amazing. Hundreds and hundreds of real transactions on the blockchain, every one of them recorded. Great proof of concept for the idea that a community, because you can't do this with a whole country, but a small community, and you want to know one of the best places to try it, we talked with people who are Native Americans who have sovereign land. They can do whatever they want with land ownership. It's their land. It doesn't belong to America. So there are groups where you can really create a proof of concept that you can have land. So we were trying to do it in Wyoming, and it's a challenge, but you can have a piece of land where it's constantly for sale. Some of the challenges with that are the incentive to build on the land. If you're going to build something on the land, obviously you're going to value the land higher once it's built. And so you have to think about, it's a balance of taxes versus value. But it's a very interesting potential for Web3 in the future. And this is an old idea from the 60s, but we wanted to, one of the guys on our team, a guy named Scott, is a PhD economist. And so we're working with him on this.
Okay. A lot of different places we could go. So let's go to the next metaverse. You mentioned in the beginning, we could get into what the definition was. When I listened to your DAO, the Metaverse podcast with, I can't remember the gentleman's name at right now, it was Web3 with me, right? So when you did that, about 23 minutes in, you defined the metaverse as being a collection of technologies.
Sure.
Do you still hold that to be your definition of metaverse? You went into far greater detail, but you started off with the metaverse is a collection of technologies. And then
sure. So short answer, yes. Kind of longer answer, I think when we talk about the metaverse, there are two pathways to discuss it. One is more practical and one is more philosophical. So in terms of a practical method, if we are not talking philosophy, what is the metaverse? It is a collection of technologies. One of the technologies is data storage. You simply can't create this much data. Look at something like Decentraland or Sandbox. All of the graphics, the interfaces, all of that takes a lot of data storage. Hopefully, decentralized data storage, so that it's not all stored on an Amazon web server. And we all call it Web3 when it's on AWS. It also requires some sort of virtual interface. Now, typically we think of that as an Oculus or Apple glasses or whatever, the Meta Ray-Bans, whatever they're coming out with, something visual where you can see it. We're not at the point yet where we have something proprioceptive, haptics, gloves, something you could put on your shoulders. There's a great example of this. People think about something very both futuristic and dystopian, like Ready Player One, where that's a world we don't quite live in yet. or something from William Gibson, some sort of cyber world where people are, or I think it's an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie or something where people are like laying on a bed and nobody functions in real life and we're all just in this dream world. That's not really the metaverse I see, but the metaverse I see is proprioceptive. What I mean by that is
intense sensory interactions.
Well, right now we experience our body in space. I can touch my nose without any real difficulty because my fingers, I have a sense of my space. I know the distance from here to my nose. I just know. I don't know how I know, but my brain understands where things are spatially. And I have a sense of existing in this three-dimensional space. Now, if this was the metaverse, if this was just a really highly rendered video that you were looking at, and this was not just a background, but a 3D interactive background, and I was a photorealistic avatar, how would I know how far I need to walk before I hit that brick wall? Or how close this microphone really is to me? Maybe it's just how do I know where things are in space? That's a feeling of your body and other objects and distances, and that's a very hard thing to replicate in the metaverse. But what we've discovered is, I shouldn't say we, what scholars and scientists have discovered is you don't need that. Just like in a game, you just render what's in front of you. You don't need to render the whole world, you just render what you're looking at. So you don't need nearly the amount of space or memory that we would imagine. And to visualize yourself in space, there's a funny old experiment people used to do where you have a person sitting on a table and they put one hand on the table and over here is a rubber arm. They put their hand behind their back. So one arm is real, one arm is rubber. You ever seen this? And they'll take a feather and stroke both arms. Obviously, one arm you feel the feather, the other arm you don't because it's a fake arm. Then they take a hammer and hit the rubber arm and people react with pain. Because your brain, through mirror neurons, if it's stroking both arms with a feather and you feel it on one, your brain just assumes you feel it on both. It's why people who lose a limb have phantom limb syndrome. Because we have mirror neurons that reflect these ideas. So the point is they did experiments in the metaverse where they would have somebody put on glasses, an Oculus. You could see a photorealistic version of yourself in the metaverse. And then in the metaverse, you see someone tickling your back with a feather. And in real life, someone tickles your back with a feather and you start to identify with the avatar. You don't just see it, you start to feel it. You could then have wind blow your avatar's hair and you can start to feel it. Because our brains are incredible, but they're very easy to fool. It's why if you put on an Oculus right now and watch a roller coaster, a lot of people get sick. Your brain doesn't know it's not real. So that's
really the first pathway is the technology and all the things that come with it.
Sorry?
You said that was the first pathway? You said there were two pathways.
We're all practical because this is the technologies. There's the data storage technologies. There's the visual technology. There's the haptic technology. There is the technology of the Internet of Things, making sure that every single thing can have its own address. And I'm not a coder, so there's so much technology that I can't speak to very well. But there's just this giant bundle of, look at the graphics technology that's needed to make things photorealistic. Sandbox is the best of them, in my opinion. Decentraland and Voxels are both very kind of low resolution, and Sandbox is amazing. But that takes a lot of computing power. There's a lot of stuff it's hard to run on a laptop that isn't very strong. So all of these are a bundle of technologies, and the metaverse is simply that. Now, what we do with it is different. If you think about, speaking of laptops, when the laptop first came out, people looked at it as a joke because all the software that had been written up to that time was written for these giant, mega, massive computers. There was no use for a laptop. But the laptop was a disruptive device because people started creating technology to use on a pre-existing device. It's the same idea as far as I'm concerned. We create the metaverse, and then we figure out what to do with it. That's all the practical direction. I see, by the way, that we're coming up on an hour, and because I just love to talk, I don't know if we're getting anywhere in this conversation, but
we're starting to. What's the second pathway?
Philosophical.
Okay.
So here, let's get into Taoism for a moment. Taoism says being comes from non-being. And non-being and being are both part of the Tao. The Tao says there's a difference between Li and Qi. Qi is the underlying essence. The Japanese would call Ki, or Qi is this, it's life force, is our Qi. It's what makes us alive, what makes this bunch of atoms and molecules and cells and all of these inner parts alive. What I think in America some people might call a soul. Qi is a much more expansive concept than that, because Qi is like, if you think of Tai Chi, Tai Chi is that slow movement, the exercise, that's an energy generation, and that's Qi, the underlying substance of the universe. And then there's Li, which is form, like the Li of a table. A table, you can think of this in a Platonic way too, with Plato. Plato talked about the true shapes of things, like the true idea. The idea of a table. There is no table in reality that will ever be as ideal as the perfect table, because table isn't a thing, it's an idea. Man is an idea. Microphone is an idea. These are all just ideas. And then we make imperfect versions of them in our world. And Li is the very similar idea in Chinese, that there are these ideas we have of a table or a person, and the Qi is what gives them force. So you think of the metaverse as, the way I would describe it from a philosophical direction, I would say it's not created. It always existed. We just found it. You think about the 1500s in the New World, when they were exploring, when Cortez, was exploring in the 1400s. There were a lot of countries that had ships that could go very far. So why didn't they find the New World in 1300? Because they lacked navigation. They lacked a magnetic compass. They lacked certain tools, and they lacked certain technologies. What they didn't lack the ships. They lacked the technology to use the ships. What we are doing now, I believe, is discovering new land that we didn't know was there. It exists. It's always existed. We just had to access it. It is infinite. It can be inhabited. And think about what happened when people, especially from the global north, or the first world as they would have called it in the past, think about what happened when people from the global north found, discovered, colonized the New World. Think about how that changed the economy of the world, the creation of America, the horrible colonial and imperialist experiences that happened throughout the world, but the expansive technology, the cultural exchange, every development of the Industrial Revolution, just everything was a product of discovering the New World. Well, that's what we're doing now. We're discovering the next New World. We're just beginning to learn how to get there. We don't know how to populate it yet. We don't know how to live there. We don't even know what to do there. We don't know what it'll be like. But there was a sociologist in the mid-1800s named Ferdinand Tönnies, German guy, and he was working at the same time as traditional sociologists, Marx, Weber, Durkheim, and he had this idea called Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft. And what he believed is, he was watching Germany and watching industrialization. He was watching these cities grow, and he felt this cold, faceless city where you get all these people coming together for money, and they just don't really know each other anymore. And it becomes very transactional. And it's very easy to have one person at the top who controls a big business, and they don't really know their employees anymore. And it's easy to cut corners, and it's easy to try to give people less money. I mean, do you think Jeff Bezos knows the name of his employees? Like, it becomes so easy to be faceless. And he called that Gesellschaft. And he felt that at some point in the future, the distant future, we would have to come full circle back to the village, back to the Gemeinschaft, the small community of trust, where we do know each other. We do have accountability, responsibility, where we are decentralized, where we have some polycentric government. Maybe we do have a government that does certain things for everybody. But we also need to have these local governments that really have a say. And we all need to be involved and civically involved. And that's the Gemeinschaft, and that's what I believe the DAO is. It is the technological return to the village that Tony's talked about.
So pathway 1 would be the technology. Pathway 2 is that we didn't create it, we found it, and it's the return to the village community.
It's a space that we can turn. It's a space that always existed, that we have discovered. And look, plenty of people are going to think this is nonsense. And, and look at, well, maybe. I'm not defending this. It's just my opinion. I think life is more beautiful this way. And so it's a space. Undoubtedly, it's a space. And I think we can make it into a place. And in that place, I think what we need are decentralized communities.
Okay. And so now that we've
finished. We discovered what the metaverse is.
Now that
I feel like everybody owes us a pretty significant debt, right?
BOTB, I mentioned earlier when I first got on to your introduction in BOTB back in August, you said that whichever DAO chooses to move in the trajectory of refining academic knowledge is the one who will have the seat at the table in the future. And to me, that's a powerful statement. I found myself agreeing with that. Whoever refines that academic knowledge, who can facilitate their entry into the broader community at large, I'm talking the Web2 community, just the broader internet community, has found a way to plug into the flow that already exists in our world. Whereas right now we're insulated. We have our own language, we have our own way of doing business. It takes some effort to get involved. Once you're in, then it's second nature, but it can take a bit of time to make that switch. But whoever refines the academic knowledge will help facilitate their ability to stay within, let's call it, you said seat at the table, but I would say it keeps them competitive among everyone else they're
So
around.
what I'd want to define here more carefully is the idea of what do I mean by academic knowledge? Because I'm saying whoever has X wins the game. Whoever has X has a seat at the table. Okay, then what's X? Because obviously, in my opinion, that's very important. It's what wins the game. So I called it academic knowledge. And I should preface this by saying a lot of people in Web3 do not like that term because this is Web3, to me, the ethos is very disruptive. And I believe that. One of my favorite projects right now is Kleros, which seeks to disrupt the civil law system. And I've worked with them. I had a podcast with them. I don't know if you happen to find that, but a podcast with, I believe it was MemeBrains and the head of coding for Kleros. They disrupt civil law, which is absolutely amazing. And they're doing an amazing job, and I see a unbelievably bright future for Kleros. There's a lot of things to be disrupted. Pharmaceuticals, the insurance industry. There are DAOs that do insurance. There's a lot of disruption in the Web3 space. So to say something like academic knowledge, that just conjures up ivory tower, images of pedigrees, PhDs, overpaid professors, neoliberals, all of this ideology of privilege. Most people don't get to go to college, let alone to have the opportunity to get a master's or a PhD. It is such a privileged thing, speaking in the global space. And right now, the people who have that privilege, for the most part, are people in the global north, America, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, England, France, Spain, all these kind of Germany, all these places. But what I really mean by academic knowledge is I mean legitimacy. And to me, the key word is legitimacy. I mentioned that there's sort of 3 levels of DAOs, historically speaking. To me, DAOs began, as early as 2014 probably, but 2016, 2017, that's when you began to get DAOs, and anybody could be a DAO. It didn't mean anything. But that's when you started to get, in like 2019, you got some legislation in Wyoming. It started to sort of mean something, and Then you got the second wave of DAOs, where some of them went bankrupt, but you had some big ones. You had Bankless DAO, CityDAO was pretty legit, Lex DAO, the DAO of lawyers, Cabin DAO, the DAO of people meeting together and innovating. You started to have some real DAOs that were, Aave is a huge DAO. You some DAOs that were really significant. Optimism now. I think we're in phase 2, and I think that's going to last for a while. And we're going to figure out now which DAOs do something. Which DAOs create community, which DAOs are entrepreneurial, which DAOs are public. I mean, look at Gitcoin. Wonderful example of a DAO that does something. Which DAOs, to me, get into phase 3 has to do with legitimacy. You cannot fundamentally, as someone who is a professor of human resource management, you can't have a DAO where it's not possible to reprimand anybody, where somebody can get a grant of money and then they have no accountability. They submit a proposal, they get $100,000, and hey, let's really hope that they spend it. Well, no legitimate business runs that way. And if you're giving people a grant of money and there's no way to claw back the funds, there's no accountability, there's no responsibility, except most DAOs would say like, well, every month you got to write a report on what you did. Well, ChatGPT can write a great report on what I pretend I did. That lacks legitimacy. Real businesses don't run that way. I mean, as a business law professor for a lot of years. So there are things that the DAO space truly lacks from a business perspective. What we need to do is study DAOs. Well, a good example is I'm now very involved in ApeCoin DAO. ApeCoin DAO, like many DAOs, is sort of a plutocracy, which is to say it's one coin, one vote. So if you buy 6 million coins, you have 6 million votes. I, David, have 4 coins. So I have 4 votes. If you have 6 million votes and I have 4 votes, I'm sorry, but I'd hardly call that a democratic government. I mean, it's a government by the rich. That's all it is, and that's called a plutocracy. And many DAOs are plutocratic. Well, when we're talking about legitimacy, that's not really going to work. Then it's fine. You just have a DAO of a few very, very rich people and everybody else hoping the price of the coin goes up. That's not really what the point of a DAO is. Now, in DAOs, we don't even have the technology to really do proof of humanity yet. We're getting close with WorldCoin and things like that, but nobody wants to get their eyeballs scanned. So we're still a little while off from having real proof of humanity, which means you can't do a Sybil attack and just open 10 wallets and say you're 10 people. Gitcoin Passport is one sort of method of identifying yourself. But, the point of this is... What's the point of this? What am I even talking about here? So the point is that
academic refinement.
To get to the third level, the legitimacy, who do you need to be taken seriously by? Who needs to take you seriously to have what I call a seat at the table? And I don't mean this in a bad way, the answer is not crypto degens. The answer is not people who want a Lambo or want price go up. It's things like the United Nations. They take you seriously, you have a seat at the table. You don't need, most of countries in the United Nations have a population of less than 10 million people. And their treasuries, so to speak, their country treasuries are not in the many trillions of dollars. Like, DAOs can compete. We are not far off from a DAO. If you have a DAO with 2 million people and a treasury, ApeCoin used to have $3 billion. You have a DAO of a couple 100,000 people, 500,000 people, and $10 billion. You don't think countries are going to take you seriously? That's real money and power and a lot of people. And you have countries out there like Estonia. I have an e-residence from Palau, and one of my best friends has an e-residence from Estonia. Barbados already opened the first diplomatic office in the metaverse. There are countries out there that want to be forward-thinking. They may recognize a DAO as a semi-sovereign agent.
So
you're never going to be sovereign.
Academic knowledge help us do that?
The only way anybody's going to take any of this seriously is if you have a paper written that has proper methodology, research, academic rigor, and it's published in recognized journals, it's peer-reviewed, and universities and international organizations and scholars can look at this and say that is verified. Because right now we suffer from a crisis of what is the truth. We live in a post-truth society. We don't know what's true and what's not. We literally just had a debate last night in America with two people where they needed to be fact-checked because they say things that are not the truth. We don't know what the truth is. There are lies all around us. So blog posts, I'm sorry, they don't cut it. It just doesn't matter. You can have 100 blog posts with 1,000 great ideas. Cambridge won't take you seriously. Oxford, Yale, Princeton, Harvard, Stanford, MIT. These are blockchain societies. There's a blockchain society at every one of those schools. There are people engaged in this. And the ones who are getting the grants, America gives out billions of dollars in academic and scientific grants every year. Most universities give out hundreds of millions of dollars in academic grants. People think that the money in Web3 comes from NFTs. Real money comes from governments. That's where the money is. It's in universities and governments, but they don't give it to blog post writers. You know, to get a seat at the table, you really need to be able to participate in the Web1 world of knowledge creation. And so many DAOs talk about education. And education is the transfer of knowledge, the transfer of skills, but it's not the creation of knowledge. In DAOs, in Metaverse, we're trying to create new ways to govern. We have to prove it works. I mean, I just said, ApeCoin DAO had hundreds of thousands of people and $3 billion. That was less than 6 months ago. Now they have $300 million.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea what would happen to a country if they went from 3 billion to 300 million? It would be, the whole place would fall apart. Like,
yeah.
This is not being studied. How did that happen? We need to know, because we can't prevent it if we don't know. All of these things need to be learned and studied at the academic level where they're published in journals, and scholars from around the world trust that. Because while we do live in a post-truth society, scholars and academics are actually a pretty sizable group of people who kind of still have a method of truth. The slogan of the Royal Society in England, this dates back to 1200. People don't read, or maybe 1100, was don't trust, verify. People think that's a Web3 slogan. That was from 1100 AD, the Royal Society of England. Don't trust, verify. Academics have been doing this for a millennium. We've been doing the don't trust, verify. We want a seat at the table. We have to verify that this stuff is real.
No, that makes sense to me. I like the way you're going with. I can see some connections to the Sandbox DAO, although we can hold off on that because I think your connection to the ApeCoin DAO does bear fruition in what you're saying. A study from it going, I think it was, I calculated the exact figures in one of my improvement proposals because that spawned a SIP for me to, as of right now, put together a team of experts to churn out realistic revenue options and revenue plans so that the Sandbox DAO can start generating money now, start accruing revenue streams now versus years down the road when, like ApeCoin DAO, where it's trying to grasp for whatever it can as fast as it can. I've been listening to BOTB for quite some time, and that theme started emerging over time. Like, wow, we this train's coming for all of us. Every DAO. How do you bring in more than what you're pushing out? And if what you bring in isn't enough, if what you're spending is less than what you're earning, then it's only a matter of time before that number capsizes your project, your organization, unless you have some sort of philanthropic
This comes back
benefactor.
in economics. This is the free rider problem,
Yeah.
right? So if you want to create something, a community, a business, an entrepreneurial enterprise, a startup, whatever it is you're creating, if you're creating, the free rider, if you're creating a transit system and you spend all this money on the trolley or the bus, how do you stop people from just jumping on and using what you created to their own benefit? It wears it down over time. It takes up the resources. It uses the infrastructure, but they're not paying for it. how do you prevent the free riders? People in all of these DAOs, you buy the token or the NFT, you hope the price goes up, but you're not really involved in the governance. And here's the thing, people want to be. The people at least I can't speak for everybody, but most of the people I've met in Web3, they deeply want to be involved to the extent they can be. They want to learn more. So in CityDAO, we had guilds where each guild brought in people and we had weekly meetings, and people who didn't know much about stuff, we would train them up, whether it was in advertising or marketing or graphic design or law or whatever. You got to train people up in a community. And I think a lot of DAOs, you end up with a small group of people who make a lot of money. There's something in sociology called Michel's iron law. The iron law, which has never been broken, says every small community that starts for a good social purpose ends up with a small group of people in power who want to hold on to their power.
The iron law of oligarchy.
Yeah. Michel's iron law of oligarchy. Now, I don't think it really is true in I'm sure everybody could find edge cases where there was some community, let's say a religious community like the Shakers or something, maybe. But DAOs, I believe, could be the community. We don't get anywhere until we break Michel's iron law. We need a community of people who are socially minded. And I don't mean, look at something like KlimaDAO that works for carbon credits. And climate activism. Great. You can have another DAO that's pro saving the dolphins or saving the coral reef or cleaning up the debris in space. You could have DAOs for every single one of these purposes. And the DAOs could make money. But if you have a small group of people who rise to the top and start making a lot of money, a big part of my research now is the effect of incentives, financial incentives in DAOs. Because we have all this money, we could distribute it to people, but that's not really what happens. What happens is a few people earn a lot. Everybody else earns nothing and hopes their token price goes up. That is a reiteration of Michel's iron law. When we break the iron law, then we're really getting somewhere.
Okay. I put that in the open topics if we have enough time to get to later, because I'm intrigued about that. Let's zero in on CityDAO. Took me by surprise that it's all over with. So at this point, it'll be like a debrief, a retrospective, if you will.
Yeah.
At the time, I had DAO-based.ai show that it had 4,800 token holders, 68 proposals, and 3,400 wallet voters. So that was interesting, very fascinating to see. And so the DAO history is that. So you said in the beginning, and as of over 3 months ago, the CityDAO is concluded itself. It airdropped its treasury to the community.
Yeah. So let me give if it's okay, like a quick debrief and rundown.
Sure. The next one's going to be what is CityDAO. So go right ahead.
CityDAO started in around 2021, based on this idea from a guy named Scott Fitz, without doxing his real name. And he had this idea. He put out a tweet that said, "Hey guys, I want to buy some land and create a DAO in Wyoming to test out the new Wyoming DAO law." And a bunch of people got together. They put in some money. They created this NFT that was CityDAO NFT Citizen. They sold them first citizen, founding citizen. They raised, I don't know, something like $400,000. They bought the land. It was, I believe, 40 acres of kind of scrub land. You couldn't really build much there. It was zoned for a one-family house, but very windy. There were bears. It's not a good place to live in Wyoming. It was pretty cheap. Now, very soon after that, Vitalik Buterin wrote about CityDAO because they not only do they run in similar circles, Scott and Vitalik, but Vitalik is very interested, and I shouldn't speak for him, but his blog posts speak to the idea that he's very interested in how DAOs can help humans to gather and how we can change things like fractionalized ownership of assets and real estate through DAOs. So he mentioned it. Well, boom, all it takes is a mention from Vitalik. We were up to $8 million. Now, here's where you get problem number one. I joined CityDAO shortly after that. Maybe this happened in 2020 and I joined in 2021 or 2019 and whatever it was. I joined shortly after Vitalik had mentioned us. When I joined, we already had $8 million. I didn't know any of this stuff about Vitalik. I knew who he was, but I didn't know the early history of CityDAO then. I just got in because I was interested in fractionalizing real estate. And problem number one, this actually is very similar to kind of what happened in ApeCoin. The way the tax law works in America, and this is not true in lots of countries, but it is in America, is with crypto, every time you transfer an asset to another asset, Bitcoin to Ethereum, Ethereum to, whatever, to Ethereum to Sol, Sol to AVAX, whatever. Anytime you make any transfer, it's called a taxable event and you have to pay taxes. So when people bought the NFT with cash, the price of Ethereum at that time was around $4,000 per token. CityDAO now owed tax at a rate of as if we got $4,000 per ETH. That's what we owed taxes on. However, our treasury, because we just started, we didn't have a financial manager or anything. The price of ETH dropped to like $1,000. So take a look at ApeCoin. You had billions of dollars when the price of Ape token was $4. Well, what happens when it drops to 60 cents if your team never diversified from ApeCoin to gold, silver, Bitcoin, Ethereum, US Treasury bonds, USDC, anything? They just had it in Ape. Well, the price plummets, so does your treasury. Well, that happened to us. Our treasury was 100% in ETH. ETH plummets to $1,000, and we now owe taxes that would almost bankrupt us. So already we were in a tenuous situation where we had less than 3 million and we owed $1 million in tax. We did pay all the taxes legally. That was a big part of my focus on legitimacy, was we have to pay our taxes. We cannot be incorporated in the Metaverse. We're really incorporated in Wyoming. So anyway, throughout the next 2 to 3 years, we had a first city council. I was on that. I helped write the city charter. And we started these guilds, and we developed a lot of people, and it was going great. The Education Guild, we had a 3-day online conference with academics from around the world. We were doing all kinds of things, but the money was going down. We were getting all these CIPs, and people were requesting grants for this and that, and it's supposed to be algorithmic. So if you get enough votes, but it wasn't that hard to get enough votes if you knew the right people. And you started to get these issues, and then you started to have these de facto delegations. They're not, we didn't create them, but you would have the Chinese delegation, the Middle Eastern delegation, the Turkish, just all the people would sort of band together and block their votes. And then these delegations could kind of vote against each other, and it became very politicized. So at that point, we really needed to pay our taxes. But again, this is a problem with DAOs. If everything is done through a democratic vote, well, if you take a vote, you have to take a vote to pay your taxes. What if people say no? Which is what they did. So we couldn't pay our taxes, but we have to pay our taxes. Like, what do you mean? It's like taking a vote on whether I can go to the bathroom, but I have to go to the bathroom. So I was able to help engineer an international city council with a certain number of Chinese members and Turkish members and French members and, just something to get it together. So great. We had an international city council and we paid our taxes, but then the international city council was deadlocked on everything. Every time the Turkish would make a proposal, the Chinese would block it, and the Chinese would make a proposal, and the British would block it. It was absurd, but, learning lessons. So you got all these delegations kind of not working together.
Wow.
Ultimately, it really came down to one issue, which is if we're going to build something on land, well, I guess 2 issues. One, if we're going to buy land, should we buy a pre-existing structure like an Airbnb or a school or something? Or should we buy empty land, which is cheaper, but you need infrastructure, you need electricity and plumbing, and you need to build something, and that takes time and permits and, money. And so what land should we buy? And then the bigger issue, where? Should we buy it in China? Should we buy it in Turkey? Should we buy it in the Philippines? Should we buy it in Vietnam? Should we buy, hey, it's a great time to buy in Cambodia. Yeah, it is, but who's going to be there in Cambodia? So we couldn't decide where to buy the land. And Scott kept putting out proposal after proposal. Let's just do something. Let's do something grand. Let's do it. and every proposal just kept getting blocked. And the community started to get a little bit toxic, I feel, because nothing was happening. It was stagnant. And finally, I decided to leave. And I gave in my notice, my resignation.
When was this?
Because I felt. Sorry?
When was this?
Probably 6 months ago. I'd have to look at the CIP. But I decided to resign because I felt like the community wasn't being well served by all this infighting, and that the best thing I could do was continue being a citizen, but continue working on what I believe is legitimacy and fractionalization. And at that point, Scott, the founder, also chose to leave. And once the two of us left, pretty much, we made a proposal to just give the treasury back to all the citizens. It passed with a supermajority. And so we gave a couple weeks. Scott had taken a snapshot and let everybody see it to be transparent, so you could see how much you were getting, to make sure your wallet was listed. And then in tranches, we gave it all back to the people. I believe the land was donated to charity. And the end of CityDAO. Wonderful learning lesson. Really, I take so much away from it. I made good friends who I still talk to all the time. A ton of great experiences. I wouldn't trade it for the world.
So this happened 3 months ago is when it all came to a close?
Pretty much. That's when I joined ApeCoin DAO. My friend MemeBrains had recommended ApeCoin DAO is, kind of like it's a whole a level above. I mean, ApeCoin DAO at that point had like $1 billion, 300 million, whatever they had. It was a lot more than we had, which was 3 million. It was an order of magnitude, 2 orders of magnitude larger. But what's been fascinating is to see how problems do get replicated. Scale doesn't necessarily matter.
Yeah.
We need to fix these problems, but to fix them, we need to analyze them. I've seen so many people at ApeCoin DAO, very, very smart people, making very smart suggestions, but they have no real rigorous data to back this up. I happen to agree with some of their opinions, but it doesn't matter if I agree. But what happens is when you have legitimized evidence that's been proven and a lot of people agree, that's when it becomes much easier to pass a vote.
So I did some history digging myself when I put together the revenue option SIP for Sandbox DAO. And the ApeCoin DAO has, as of February, ApeCoin DAO has only been in existence for 2.5 years per CoinGecko. ApeCoin's original $25.97 billion market cap from April 2022 had been reduced 96% to $843 million in July of 2024.
And you're talking about market cap. So that's if all of the tokens were sold, which of course they're not.
Yeah.
The amount in the actual treasury was billions at one point, then was 300 million. Now the banana bill passed, which was $100 million proposal, which passed that's a great case study. It passed like that. It just slid right through because all the people who have millions of votes wanted it.
Yeah.
It didn't matter how many other people. There are 224,000, I think, individual wallets. You could have every single wallet but I've vote against it. It would still pass super easily.
Yeah, in the dashboard, I see 289 million ape. And this was just a month or two ago.
Yeah.
And its cash flow is 10.9 million ape going out the door. So that to me was a big eye opener for myself that if you don't have something going for you, you cannot expect to keep on doling out money and grants and expect to remain solvent, and then all the problems
this is
introduces.
It's a big issue in the DAO space. Are DAOs businesses? Because businesses don't operate this way. Businesses don't just give out grants with no accountability. That's just not how they work. You can't.
I think
obviously,
it operates
you can't
closer
expect
to a nonprofit. The more I observe, and I've only
I
been
would
looking
agree.
at DAO since May 28th, since Sandbox announced its DAO out of nowhere. There was no preamble. There was no preface. They had been doing it in secret. I say in secret. They had been doing it outside of the public's view for 8 months. And then May 28th, they announced the DAO and the SIP and the foundation to the legal structure and the budget and the special counsel all at once. And
Sure.
now I've been delving into it ever since. But the more I look at it, the more I think this looks a lot like a nonprofit.
Let me propose a vision to you that I have of the future, 5 to 10 years from now. Imagine a company like Nike.
Different than the 5 to 10 years that I know that you talked about in DAO to Metaverse. Go ahead.
Well, I don't remember that.
I do. I've got it as one of the questions, but I already know the answer.
Okay.
Now that CityDAO's gone.
I love that guy. I forget his name. I haven't talked to him in so long. We used to talk every week. God, he's so cool. Forget his real name. I'll have to find him.
I'll
inspired
find
me
it.
to
I
do
know
that.
I wrote it down.
Please.
But,
I miss him.
you said in the next 5 to 10 years, this was 2 years ago, you wanted to be the dean of the city, and you want to be offering multiple degrees, sociology or history. And my question was,
I'm right on that pathway.
are you still? Okay.
Oh my God, yeah. I am now working with a group in California called RTM, the Center for Research Theory and Methodology. They are a group of professors. They have 30 to 40 years experience. They publish a very well-known academic journal. So they have it down. How do you go from being a professor to writing articles to getting them reviewed to making your own journal to publishing a journal for years and years and years? And their philosophy is we need to end this pedigree stuff. We need to have teams of methodology experts, PhDs who know the academic game, along with people who are content experts. So let's say you're a firefighter. Why should I, the PhD student, interview 20 firefighters and then think I know something about it? Why wouldn't I co-write the paper with you? Because nobody's done that before. Every single paper has always been by the PhDs about non-PhDs. How about the non-PhDs get involved in it? Then you start to get the pedigree. Well, nobody ever wanted that before because that's disruptive. But that's what this group in California has been working on. Then couple that with the idea of starting a journal. So they already have one. Recently, I met the guy, and I'm not going to give any names yet because it's not formalized, but it's the first journal of its kind, let's say. Very legitimate. This person is, I was starstruck, and I don't get starstruck easily in the crypto space, but this person blew my mind. They've run a journal for a very long time, and they're very interested in working with this team. And just this morning, I had a call with somebody who does very serious work in micro-credentialing and courses. And I mean, this stuff it's taken years, but it's coming together for very real. I mean, I'm not going to be the dean of CityDAO University. I should think.
Yeah.
Not anymore.
But so that's taken on a new form, but the vision is still the same. By the way, his name was Zach.
Yes, thank you. So my vision is what I was just talking about is not a vision for David. It's a vision for the DAO space. And it's one that's a little bit contentious. So imagine the big companies, Nike, Pepsi, Coca-Cola, Merck Pharmaceutical. Let's take Coca-Cola as an example, Kellogg's. Let's take Coca-Cola. Let's say that every company learns about Web3. Web3 is just starting. It's nascent. Nobody knows what the blockchain really, I mean, so few people. Big companies don't have blockchain departments. But imagine that Coca-Cola realizes we can take $5 million, $1 million, nothing to them, absolutely nothing. We'll take a couple million, we'll put it in a DAO treasury, and we'll create the Coca-Cola DAO. Now, everybody who is in it, you buy an NFT and you are a Coca-Cola citizen. And you can be part of the Coca-Cola world, the Coca-Cola country. You are a citizen. You're not just a brand representative. You're not just wearing Nike shoes. You are part of the country Nike. You're a citizen of Nike. What do you get for that? Right now, if you wear your shoes, you just represent the brand for free. But if you buy the NFT or you're airdropped it or something, you're part of this DAO community. You can rise up. What if you have great marketing strategy ideas? What if you're a kid from Istanbul who's 17 but has fantastic marketing ideas or graphic design skills? You propose them through a Coca-Cola improvement proposal, a CIP. They get traction, they move up. You get more money than you ever could have made working locally, and you get known, you get a team. I mean, Coca-Cola is watching all of this. You have another team that has $1 million just to spend for the public good. All it is, it's a grants DAO, just to help out communities, to help out minorities, to help out disadvantaged people. They can focus on whatever they want. How does this look bad for Coca-Cola? This looks fantastic. So Coca-Cola would have people from around the world, or Nike or Reebok, all of them would have customers, consumers, because while I am pretty anti-capitalist, I'm a Buddhist and a Taoist, I live in the real world of capitalism in America. I am not trying to disrupt the world. I'm trying to figure out how we make it better. So we get these big companies that have these enormous treasuries, that have consumers, and what they want is the customer to feel connected to their brand. Right now, if you buy a pair of Nike shoes, you know what you don't get? Money. How about you buy a Nike NFT and you get to be part of a DAO that is 5 million in its treasury, and you can make all kinds of proposals and you can get compensation. You can have teams that run it and get money for all people all around the world. Nike could slash their advertising costs if they have their own customers doing their ad campaigns. They could slash costs all over the place. You could have people around the world. You could create a customer base that is international, that knows very little divisiveness, that is incredibly diverse, that is committed to your brand because they're personally benefiting, and you could give back to communities. I don't see why any company wouldn't do this. And I think they will. I think, look, we have a DAO law in America in 2 out of 50 states. This is not even taken off yet. No one knows what this is. We don't have the DAO law in 50 states. We will. And when we do, then people are going to figure out what to do with it. Well, you know who helps them figure out? We do. And you know how we help them figure it out? By academic work, by the creation of knowledge. Now, that's not the only thing. You know, let's say you're doing all this work in SandDAO, and you're on the ground and you're writing SIPs and you're developing the community and running this podcast. And let's say I am a PhD scholar, which I am, and I want to write a paper and I want to work with you, and it discusses how did a DAO just come into being like that? Because, hey, if SandDAO did it this way, so could Coca-Cola. They could work privately for 8 months, and what you and I could study would be, how did this affect the community attitudes towards the DAO? All we do is interview people, give out a survey. Did people feel good about starting the DAO this way? What were their things
They did not.
So, well, and then why? And what would make them feel better? And how did it happen? And what could be... We write this into a paper, and we demonstrate that this maybe was not the most effective way for brand loyalty and for consumer engagement, and we throw in these kind of words, and we use some classical theories of marketing and advertising, or customer satisfaction theories, or the rational theory of choice, of motivation. You write a paper, I mean, that's all it is. And then universities, companies, I mean, you want to make money, ask how much money Coca-Cola has. You know, this is not... I used to tell the people, as a final point on this, when I was a theater teacher, and they would say, David, we need to charge more for tickets. And I would say, no, because you don't make your money from tickets, and you don't make your money from classes, and you don't make your money from selling t-shirts. You make your money from getting commercials. And you only get commercials if you're the fucking best. Ooh, can I curse? I'm sorry I cursed.
Yeah, you're fine.
2 of my actors are now multimillionaires, listed in the top 10 A-list actors in China. They are so rich that they came to me crying after this was all over, telling me that they lie to their parents because they're ashamed that they have so much money. They are rich beyond their wildest dreams. And they didn't get that money by charging $10 instead of $5 for a ticket. And you know what? We don't get it by charging $20, $200 instead of $20 for an NFT. That's just not where the money comes from, not the real money. You know, the money doesn't come from, I have a brand of coffee called SandDAO Coffee, and I'm going to return 2% to the treasury, and I expect returns of $1,000 per month. Cool. That's awesome. Do it up for brand loyalty and engagement. Let's get involved. But like, that's not Oxford money. That's not Coca-Cola money. They will throw millions of dollars your way if they think it can increase their brand engagement 0.5%. Like, companies don't know about this, and they will throw money at whichever DAO has a seat at the table.
Yeah. I think the way you spoke about that, I was looking at it through those lenses as well. That whoever can bridge the old and the new. The old is the wrong way, but the persistent
Legacy.
common language of humanity and business and all the different ways of being in the world versus what we are evolving into, which we don't know yet. It's still very much under debate and discussion and conflict and tension. All of that's messy, and this is more stable as can be, really. But if you can find a way to bridge that, like you mentioned, a paper, and then bridging well-known business concepts, or like McClellan's or Hertzberg's, is all these different things that I learned in business school. That
Sure.
if I can then connect as having a foundation of, hey, I know what McClellan's theories is, and what's the need of achievement or power have to do with Sandbox DAO,
Beautiful.
and
Beautiful example.
if I can make that connection, if I can articulate that in a way that someone over here can understand, then more people over here will start to bridge that gap, and then just start horizontal.
And with, I mean, I love the example of Herzberg. You know, the opposite of satisfaction is not dissatisfaction. The
Right.
opposite of satisfaction is no satisfaction. And the opposite of dissatisfaction is no dissatisfaction. You take a theory like that, which is engaging and reasonable to understand, you couple it with some data about,
Yeah.
Sandbox DAO, and you publish that in a business journal
Sure.
marketed towards, here's what a DAO does and how it potentially could be used. Here's how it was implemented by this particular organization, and here's ways it could have been improved. I mean, there are many bridges to
It's
get to
not
the new
difficult.
land.
It just takes effort.
And time.
Yeah. It's not
Time and
difficult,
effort, yeah.
especially if you have an understanding or even a Wikipedia knowledge base, let's call it, of business acumen, or you've owned your own business, and so you know what a balance sheet looks like. Like all you have to do is just connect it now to what academic theory of has been studied, it's relied upon, and it has the necessary rigor behind it. That if you connect it appropriately, then now you just access this whole network of very
But
well
you
connected, very powerful.
you made an important point before, the old world with the new, and part of the old world for publishing these kind of articles is being a PhD scholar. It's hard to get that done if you're not. The network is really only available to them. It's the same with being a lawyer. There's just things I'm allowed to do because I'm a licensed attorney. Anybody could do them, they're just not allowed. And as a PhD scholar, anybody could publish in a journal, theoretically. I've never seen an article published by someone who didn't have a PhD.
If
Or at
I were to
least,
attack this and I wasn't a PhD person, I would first start with the Web3 network. So like CoinGraph or Cointelegraph, or yes, it's somewhere like in that realm. And then I would start moving to Forbes. Just announced their own Forbes Web3, so there's probably an end there. Then I would target the undergraduate academic portion of blockchain oriented people within, call it Harvard, you could call it University of South Carolina, it doesn't matter. But you start
you
building
had,
the foundation
you had
of
said before bridges.
yeah,
And, I live in a city where there are lots of bridges. Many of them will get you to the same place, just different bridges.
sure.
So that's certainly a bridge. Now, what I would do, I would take that same article and publish in the American Journal of Management. And while you're getting a base of young people and support and Forbes and this and that, what I'd be getting is citations. And let's say I get 500
Fair, yeah,
citations
because you have
from
access to
known
that network.
scholars. And now, when your students who you're cultivating want to write articles about stuff, they're citing me. We're going to get to the same place, and I hope we're going to get there together. And it's okay that we got to build more than one bridge for sure.
Yeah. All right, so that was an interesting detour. What was your your role in CityDAO. I got that you were part of the legal guild and the education and research guild, but I
Yeah,
thought I
I was a
remember there was a different.
facilitator.
Go ahead.
I would call myself a facilitator. That's usually the word we used.
I thought I
And I
heard
was a
you were like
city
some sort of
council.
director of partnership or something of
No.
that lines. Okay, must have misheard then. So what did you do inside CityDAO while you were there?
Well, for the legal guild, we held weekly meetings that were open to everybody. We discussed the legal stuff, and then I worked with the other lawyers to draft the contracts, agreements, the independent contractor agreements, the legal rules when we had any sort of conference or get together or things like that to discuss with the rest of the DAO what you should and shouldn't say publicly, and all of the legal stuff. And then with the Education Guild, we held a weekly call. We also held a weekly discussion. We also held a bunch of different projects. Like I said, we did a convention. We taught a course in, I think it was New Zealand, at a very reputable university there, where they were teaching about blockchain, and CityDAO was their case study for the whole semester. So me and that economist, Scott, different Scott, had both gone in, and we were kind of professors there alongside the New Zealand professors, and we had groups of college students that spent months on our Discord and in the discourse forum looking at CIPs, and then they made their own proposals of how to improve the DAO, so trying to take it to the academic way. And were a bunch of other big main proposals. We did this thing in ETH Denver. And those are the ones that come to mind.
Okay.
We did, MemeBrains ran the podcast.
Right. I was just looking at his profile while we were talking about him, and I did see, I didn't notice it before, but CityDAO podcast. So what sort of governance structure did the CityDAO adopt?
Well, at the beginning, we had non-quadratic voting. So one NFT equals one vote. So there were people who were whales, so to speak. Nobody had millions, but there were people who had like 200 or 300 NFTs. And our Quorum, we had two levels and this was a learning exercise for me, where if you made a proposal for $0 to $10,000, it required, and I don't know if I'm going to remember all of these exactly, but I think it was 250 NFT votes. And if above 10,000, it required 500 NFT votes. And it was, I think, 50% majority to pass. Now, that was okay for a while until people figured out how to game the system.
Sure.
Which is to say,
999,000
was everything. And as long as you could...
Kind of what ApeCoin is going through right now?
It is... I have no idea why they did this, because we fixed it. We fixed this problem by creating an algorithmic formula that I told ApeCoin about, which was the more money you asked for, it was then the higher voter approval rating that you would need. You don't make it 69. I mean, come on, that's adorable. It's cute, guys, but you can't have the same approval rating for somebody asking for $100,000 and $3 million. You shouldn't. I don't think. If you have the exact same vote for that, then if you amass enough people on your side, why would you ever ask for less than $10 million? Whatever it would be. So you want to make it a cap at 250,000? Great. Now everybody's going to do 249,999. Fine. All you did was that. So, okay. But, we did find an elegant solution that our economist proposed that was an algorithmic curve, so that there was a minimum that if you asked... Yeah. Okay. No matter how little you asked for, you needed at least, I think it was 100 votes quadratic. So we started using quadratic voting, where it's the square root of the number of NFTs you have. I wish ApeCoin would do that too. But so if you have...
All right, say that again slower. The square root of...
the number of NFTs you have. So let's say that I am rich and I have 1,000 tokens. So the number of votes that I can exercise is the square root of 1,000. Let's make it 10,000. I have 10,000. So the square root of 10,000 is 100, right? Is 1,000. No, 100. 100 times 100 is 10,000.
I'll use a
I'm pretty
calculator.
sure.
100.
Yeah. So I
A
have
square root of
10,000.
10,000?
I have
100.
10,000 NFTs. That means I get the square root of 10,000 votes. That makes sense?
No, you lost me.
Okay. If I have one NFT, what's the square root of 1?
1.
Yes. So if you have one NFT, you get 1 vote. To get 2 votes, how many NFTs would you need to own?
4.
Yes. To get 3 votes, what's 3 times 3?
9.
Yeah. So
Okay.
as you want to buy more votes, like in ApeCoin, you want 1 million votes, buy 1 million tokens. But with Quadratic, if you want 5 votes, you need to buy 25 tokens, right? Square root of 25 is 5. Does that make sense?
I hear what you're saying. I don't understand why you're saying it.
Yeah, I'll get there.
Okay.
Just so if you want to have 5 votes, you need 25 tokens. That makes sense, right?
Okay.
Now, if you want to have 1 more vote, so now you want to have 6 votes,
36.
you're going to need to have 36 tokens.
So whenever a proposal is on the floor for voting, if I have 36 NFTs, it's only going to equal 6 votes
Correct.
for everything.
For everything. Now, let's say you have 100 NFTs. You're a whale at CityDAO if you have 100 NFTs. So you have 100 NFTs. That means you're going to get 10 votes. I don't like your proposal. I think it's bad for CityDAO. To defeat you, I just need to get 11 people. 11 individuals can defeat 1 rich person. No, and if you have 100
I
votes,
see.
let's say you want to get
It makes it
11 votes
relative.
instead of 10. It gets algorithmically, exponentially bigger. If you have 100 NFTs, you get 10 votes. If you wanted 11 votes, now you need 121. This is good for our treasury because if people want, hey, you want to buy the votes, fine, but it's going to cost you so much more. And I can defeat your bad idea by just getting a couple more people with 1 NFT each to oppose you. So the little people with a little bit of money can oppose the rich.
Okay. So for Sandbox, you have 100 lands, then, or let's just say 36 lands, then you have, in effect, 6 lands for voting.
I mean, if you did it that way, it depends. The purpose of voting this way is to get rid of whales or to reduce whales' power.
Okay.
Because if you can reduce whales' power, then you can get a large group of poor people, a large group of people with 1 NFT or 1 token can actually challenge a rich person.
Yeah.
So that was our purpose with that. And that was for the quorum. And then for the voter approval rating, which like ApeDAO just made it 69%, that percentage was an algorithm that went up the more you asked for. So you could ask for our whole treasury, but it's going to take like a 99% approval rating. If you ask for $5,000, it would take like a 35% approval rating. So you need to pass quorum and you need to get an approval rating.
So approval rating is not quorum?
No, quorum, if you don't get enough
approval
votes,
rating would be,
the vote's not even
excuse me.
legitimate.
Approval rating would be it needs X percentage of vote to pass yes.
Correct.
All right, got it.
Where ApeCoin DAO was 50%, now are 51. Now they just made it 69 for votes above 250K.
Okay, so and this scaled up the higher percentage you got for the budget? Was in the budget?
More money you requested.
Oh, the more money, okay. Of
the higher your percentage to pass would need to be.
See, these are interesting things I'd like to consider.
We thought a lot about governance. How do you stop whales from controlling this? And I feel like we did successfully stop whales. What we didn't foresee was regional delegations.
Okay, let's get into that. I
Okay,
believe
but
this is where you
I'm
started
sorry.
talking about.
I can only stay for about 10 more minutes. I gotta go.
Oh, all right. Let's triage then what we've got left.
We're coming up on 2 hours.
Sure, sure. Okay, what are some lessons? Let's just rapid fire, and then we'll use whatever time we have left. What are some lessons that you'd offer any DAO about governance, stuff that you learned from City DAO?
If people aren't kind to each other, you have an immediate giant problem. That's
Okay.
number one. Um, Money, people will come to a place they want to be, and then they will find ways to make money. People will not come to a place where it's not a nice place to be and everybody's trying to figure out how to make money. It's about the place. It's not about the money. People think it's about the money. The number one reason people take a job, according to studies, is the salary. And the number one reason people leave a job is because they have a bad relationship with their boss. Number two relationship, bad relationship with your coworkers. So people enter for money and they leave because they don't enjoy relationships. And that's been proven time and time again in multiple industries. And it's just as true here. If it's not a place that's enjoyable to be, it will not work financially.
What are your view on what is your view on governance working groups?
I'm too new to ApeCoin DAO to really weigh in on their effectiveness, though I guess I would go back to Michelle's iron law of oligarchy. If you have a small group of people making a lot of money and it's not clear exactly to everyone what they are doing, they will try to defend their position and say they're working hard in order to keep their privileged position of money and power.
Okay. What are some successful ways you've seen to maximize community communication?
Video on calls, IRL meetings, talking to people consistently outside the DAO, whether it's phone or text, but like not just meeting for calls. Actually reaching out every single day to people and having conversations with them, finding out what people's interests are besides just the DAO, getting to know them on a human level.
Okay. And Sandbox, the Sandbox game, as you've seen, is a metaverse gaming place. The Sandbox DAO is a community who is still struggling to understand what its relationship is. Most of the sentiments right now is that the way Sandbox DAO was introduced out of the norm, out of the blue, it was thrust on people. It had mostly as a negative viewpoint. People are declining to participate. In some cases, some of them just vote no on every single proposal until they believe that a voice from the community is put onto governance type leadership places. Under these conditions, what would you offer as an emergency triage addressing opening up the levels of trust or regaining some semblance of participation?
Can I ask a couple questions?
Sure.
Um,
As many as
in,
you feel you can get, as long as we can get to an answer before you got to go.
sure. Um, how do you vote? Is it based on the sand you own? The
Based on
sand
the
token?
sand, so one sand equals one voting power, one land equals 4,500 voting power,
Just regardless of the size of the land?
regardless of the size. So if you have 100 lands, you have 100 times 4,500.
What do you need? What's quorum?
Quorum is currently uh 30 million. So it's 1% of the total supply.
Do most votes meet quorum?
The last 3 have failed. The past 2 that just passed the past couple days only met quorum because Sandbox used its 27 million voting power from its wallet. Otherwise, it would have failed. So we don't yet know what that is. That's also kind of pushed into mistrust because this whole thing about how Sandbox said they wouldn't use it, but they did this time around. It wouldn't have made vote otherwise. It abstained, so it didn't change the vote. It just allowed it for the yes votes to pass.
Have any votes achieved that quorum that didn't involve Sandbox using their voting power?
Yes, the of the 13, um, I think 7 or 8 of them passed without.
And who had, I mean, 30 million, like, who had voting power? Like, are there some individuals who have 5 or 10 million or something?
No, it seemed to be. I mean, there some of them. I don't think there was one that was over 5 million. There were a few 1 millions, but it was mostly just people voting. It was a pretty
But
good
how many
spread.
people then? You're talking about 30 million. I mean, can you give me a general on a good vote? How
Yep.
many individuals vote?
Somewhere between 2 to 300, I think. Look at the last one.
So people must have quite significant voting power.
Some of them do, but like I said, I don't think I saw one of them even above 5 million.
But if you have, let's see, look at the math. If you're talking about you need 30 million
So let's look at the one that just. Let's look at
divided by 300
SIP.
people. You would need about 100,000 each person for 300 people.
So SIP 6, right, had 782 voters. That was the most popular community SIP, the first one. Top one had 3.6 million voting power.
Okay. So yeah, okay, I'm getting an idea of it. I'd have to look at a spreadsheet, in more detail to get a real sense of how many are over 500,000, how many are over, and of those that are over 500,000, how often have they voted, and has it been consistently
Quorum's a
no,
big
or
problem. It
some
started
of
creeping
the
up.
yeah, some of those data points would be valuable, but as you said, you're very new, so there wouldn't be that much data.
Right.
Do you have a treasury?
We do.
How much is
15.5
in
or
it?
15.5 million sand, of which we spent 15%.
Okay. What's the current price of sand?
It was 26 cents.
Let's say
24 cents right now.
times 25 cents. Okay, so you have $3.75 million ish. Is there a financial team that's in charge of the treasury?
Negative.
When SIP passes, how does the money get from the multi-sig to the proposers?
There is a DAO administrative team, which it was commissioned by Sebastian Bourget, the co-founder, and they have control of wallets, question mark, and or Seb and his team then transfers the money to the person.
Okay, so none of the leaders of the DAO who have significant administrative power were chosen by the DAO.
Correct.
Okay.
You could theoretically argue that that is the case because the DAO passed the first 3 SIPs, although that was I would not count that as let's call it a real test of the community's
A
indication.
couple other questions. Who is the highest, or what is the highest elected position that you have in this DAO?
It is the special council, which it's a five member team. Yatsu's on it, Sebastian Bourget, Jean-Michel Paun, Shannon
Okay, and
Snow.
those people were chosen by the DAO voting, not by
They were
Sandbox deciding.
Sebastian Bourget convinced them to join the special council. The second SIP was the one that ratified the special council.
Okay, so they weren't elected by the people necessarily.
Correct.
What
Which is why
salary
so
are
many
they
people
getting?
are voting no because of that.
Do you know what salary they're getting? Is that clear?
100,000 sand each
Per year or just in
per
general?
year, per annum.
100,000 sand. Oh, that's not very
Correct.
much.
And for Yatsu, I mean, owns
That's what I'm
Animoca
saying.
Brands, the biggest Web3 company ever of all time. Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, I don't mean this to be disparaging, but it sounds like there are no high level leaders that have been chosen from the DAO members, really.
Correct.
Okay.
That would be safe to say.
Well,
That's
I
where a
thank
lot
you
of
for all the.
trust is broken right now.
Sure, sure. Well, I mean, no trust was really established, so there isn't much to break, but.
Fair, also fair.
Obviously, what you would want would be to almost like unionize. I think you would want the community without the involvement of any whales. I would almost wonder if there's a way to make an informal vote of anybody with under 100,000 sand may vote and nobody with more can.
What would that
And
do?
well, to try to elect a representative from within the people who are involved but not heavily invested in this project. Now, maybe you'd make it anybody with less than 1 million, whatever it is, like just a vote that can't be controlled by the whales, like a more like a poll, an informal poll, where you would try to elect, let's say, 3 representatives of the DAO who have no formal affiliation with Sandbox or anything like that, and then try to hold a meeting between those 3 and the special counsel to find out what it is that Sandbox, what do they want from this DAO? Because, in working in this kind of situation, you, to me, it seems, have no leverage. You can't make
Correct.
demands on them.
That's correct. Yes.
What you need to know is what is it they want to achieve, and how can you help them achieve that?
Okay. All right. Let's go back to give me as many rapid fires as we have time left for. 68 proposals at a city DAO. I heard you say algorithmic solutions for quorum and approval ratings. What are some other rapid fire type best practices that you learned out of that?
Standardized CIPs or SIPs, making sure that every single one is legal, extreme transparency. And obviously that's an issue you're talking about, because to me that goes directly to trust. You need to be able not just to get a report from somebody about what they did or didn't theoretically do. They need to be available for calls. They need to be beholden. They need accountability. I mean, accountability for me is a real key word. Like, people need to say what they're going to do and then do it by that deadline or not get paid. People cannot. Sorry?
How did CityDAO do that?
We did our best not to pay in one lump sum.
Okay. Milestones?
We tried to use bounty boards. So we give people bounties instead of giving them compensation. And if you had a project, you try to break it into parts and you don't get the next part until the first part is met. And we'd have to make sure that everything is overseen by your peers and not by the quote unquote leaders. Because there's always the temptation for the leaders to just not give you the second part of the money or the third part, where what you need is governance by the people for the people.
Okay. Yeah. Nope. I'm seeing some some intersectionality with Sandbox on that one. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate
Thank you very
the
much.
discussion. And we got through like 85% of the questions. So there's no, I think we got exactly what we were after, which was learning from CityDAO, learning from your experience, which is vast. And I think we spent at least an hour and a half talking theoretical stuff. But even there, I was able to pick out some pieces that I think was very interested to and relevant to the Sandbox DAO.
Well, I
Are there
super
any?
appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah.
I'm very happy to meet you, and I hope we can keep talking in the future. I really applaud your efforts and the attitude and precision that you're taking in trying to move this forwards.
Thank you. Those are very kind words. I appreciate that. Are there any closing comments or any shout outs you'd like to give?
I mean, big shout out to Scott, the founder, Scott Fitz, the founder of CityDAO, and shout out to all the people in CityDAO. I mean, I won't list them all by name, but it's been a great experience. Shout out to ApeCoin DAO, and shout out to all the nice people I've met there, and shout out to your community. And then ultimately, shout out to every kid or person sitting at home listening to this and being like, I wonder if I could be part of this, because I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a coder and I'm not an anything. And shout
It
out
is
to that
possible.
person
Yep.
who absolutely, like, this. It's not just that you could be a part of this. This is your place. This is for you. This isn't for me. I'll be dead soon enough. This is for the young people who are like, what could the future possibly hold? Like, this is what it could hold.
Yeah, absolutely. And shout out to Yuma in the chat, who has been very, very active, having a little mini conversation in the chat. But thank you, Yuma, very much for participating. And Roxy Miguel, as always. Thank you for your time. Davivi, and
Thank you.
GC.
Have a great day. Bye.
All right, see you. Wow, that was impressive. So Davivi has departed, and I'm trying to put my thoughts together now on there are some key moments, and I put them in the chat, or excuse me, I put them in the slides. If you're watching the VOD, you can see. Uh, I was trying to keep up with him. He's very, very knowledgeable, and as you can see, he's pulling together different facets of life and education and academia into experience, into his understanding. He's weaving it, as G as us says, weaving it into that tapestry. But some things that I pulled out specifically from his notes was the first one when he started talking about refined academic knowledge to those who have the seat at the table. When he explained what he thought that meant, and what I heard him talk about was being able to apply it in an academic setting, and particularly a paper, something that draws in some of the well-known academia. Let's just use that word for now, but for business management concepts, talking about Series A, Series B funding, or management theories like McGregor, Theory X and Theory Y. He mentioned Maslow's, a lot of things like that where we can make it not just kind of a case study, but offer it back to the Web2 Web1 community where can become the kind of the boat that they use to cross over into Web3, something that can help build a bridge. That was fascinating. That would take a lot of effort, not difficult, but it would take a lot of effort to achieve, and being able to, because academic rigor, there's a reason why there's such a high bar when it comes to educational standards like that. It's got to be peer reviewed. It's got to use well-known studies. He called it academic rigor, and quite difficult to reach those venues. But once you do, and as he mentioned, once you bridge that gap, then you can really start to, those who figure it out have a seat at the table. And as they say it elsewhere, business, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Something else he mentioned was when we started talking about, he started talking about the city council, how real life regional politics started playing into that. Where that you mentioned the Turks, when the Turks proposed something, the Turkish international council members proposed something, the Chinese international council members voted it down. And it seemed like it was just kind of the without regard to what the content was. And that's not unlike what happens in the United Nations between countries. There are long-standing rivalries, blood feuds. I mean, many of these countries have been in existence for hundreds, I don't even know, thousands, but definitely hundreds of years. So that gets carried into these formal settings where you would think that it wouldn't, but it does. This is real life. There are a lot of stakeholders, a lot of factors that will influence your decision. What is something he said? Here's something else I said that I thought could be applied to the sandbox was the quadratic, not just the improvement to the algorithmic solution that they found for Quorum, where the square root of your tokens and NFTs equal your voting power. So for those who have thousands, the square root would be hundreds or less. So if you own 36 lands, which would equal 36 times 4,500, so 162,000 voting power. Suddenly, your square root of that is going to be 400 voting power, and that's much more accessible for someone to equalize their own vote against. So, like you said, in order for someone to beat 36, square root of that is 6, you would just need 6 other 1 square root people to do it. So much more accessible versus someone who has a million voting power, and you don't have a hope to do that with a bunch of sixes. So that was fascinating to learn about. And the very last thing He mentioned the how to maximize communication. He mentioned a union. I've had some thoughts about that. The unions, have pros and cons about them. Sometimes a victim of their own success. However, unions at its core is just power that is across a wide spectrum of individuals combined together to equal other large power. So you have large groups, they have power inherently, but then you have a bunch of little individuals banding together, they unionize, and has some parity, has some equality between their union and then the larger groups that already exist. That in and of itself is nothing wrong with that. But as we can see, kind of what's happening in other DAOs, how do we how do we combat Michelle's iron law of oligarchy? Maybe some sort of union is is in is in play here. So I think a governance working group can get us there, and not so much of a union, but as a way to have a voice to start rebuilding trust. So really fascinating discussion with the Vivi. I didn't really know him before all this. I didn't know him at all, really. I just invited him on. He came on, and then we had our podcast, and now so I'm gonna have to connect with him at a later time after I've done processed all of this. But really fascinating discussion. Loved it, and future episodes. So we already did the interview with Crypto Diplo, and we also did the one that's going to release after this is the Rules of the DAO Money with Joseph. So I'm going to release this podcast here with Davivi today or tomorrow, and then Rules with Joseph, DAO Money Rules with Joseph will release in the next few days, and then the reaction that I did to the Sandbox tutorial will release probably sometime next week. I have a number of other episodes that are upcoming. Let's see if I can't get Mateos, who's an advisory board member. I'm still trying to get in touch with Zaf Chow. Another, the next one is likely going to be 8 coin data with Derek Smart. So Derek the Smart. And then if I can't get one with Big Bull on the governance working group, and I have some other ones that I'm going to do more business oriented stuff that I think I'm really excited for, like the business of publishing experiences and selling assets on marketplace, that sort of thing. Thank you all for your time, and I'll end it there with his main message. I feel that I received from him. We have to find a way to build bridges with Web 1 and Web 2 in a way that will augment and strengthen and build community in Web 3. Thank you all for your time. Have a great day.